Hello, Dr. Jerome here again. Let's cover this week Chapter 10 in Forgiveness and Reconciliation here, our class in Conflict and Mediation. Prior versions of this textbook, I think up to about the 6th edition, didn't include this chapter, and at one point I think they put the chapter in and I was really glad to see it. The next edition took the chapter out and now it's back in. It's an interesting chapter, and I think it's an essential chapter to the entire conflict negotiation and mediation process. Because even if you resolve a conflict, the problem is people can still be kind of mad at each other over what happened, and the relationship is damaged, and further conflict may come because the resolution just isn't quite complete if there is interdependence between people, and something is still simmering on that back burner, hurt feelings, whatever. I probably don't need to tell you a whole lot about what kind of things hurt you in conflict. I think every one of us has plenty of experience in this. You can read the textbook, it goes over some of these materials. You'll also notice the chapter is written by a different author, and his degree is a Master of Divinity degree, which is interesting. There at the University of Montana, where the primary authors work. Often universities have people with that type of degree, even in a school that's not a religious school, because they are experts in a field that is essential to human life. And we have that here at Northern Arizona University with one of the campus centers and a faculty member who is an expert in that area as well. Okay, I didn't intend for this to be a long lecture, but I'm afraid as I put the slides together, it's going to turn into that. We'll start here. What is forgiveness? Giving up the idea of a better past. That's a quote from Faulkner. I kind of like it. We know what forgiveness is. We'll clarify a couple of things about it as we go here, but I think we know, and I'll try to move quickly through these slides. But I like this, giving up the idea of a better past. You can't change the past. Something happened. Feelings are hurt. Damage is done. And you can't change that past. And really, after resolution of a conflict, to really get past it requires forgiveness and reconciliation here. Okay, a few things or misconceptions about forgiveness the book tries to clear up is forgiveness does not dismiss or minimize what happened. You don't just forgive and forget. That's not how it works. It sounds nice. It uses alliteration, and the use of that rhetorical trope or figure of speech somehow makes people think it's true, but that's not how it works. We don't dismiss what happened. We don't minimize what happened. What happened is what really happened here. Forgiveness is not indifferent to justice. And forgiveness can happen, but justice may also need to happen as well. Forgiveness is not a sign of weakness on the part of the one forgiving. And this was interesting. Forgiveness cannot be offered on behalf of someone else. Not really. There are times in some of these public ceremonies where one group of people will ask public forgiveness for crimes committed against another group 100 years earlier, when we're really just the descendants of the people that had the conflict. And that's a situation where the forgiveness can be helpful, and the people who did the crime are gone. But that's probably one of the only ones. Typically, I can't apologize for what my brother says and does. I can apologize, but it's not the same as my brother apologizing to somebody he harmed. Okay, this was interesting also to me, that forgiveness is not always necessary or even the appropriate thing. There are some crimes where you don't need to forgive. That kind of goes against my Christian upbringing and belief system, and I'm still processing that one, but the book makes sense in how they describe that. And you see a picture of a fellow here, and I'll pause the lecture to tell a story. One of my best friends was murdered in 2010. This is a picture of the perpetrator on the screen. And I've had a really tough time forgiving this guy. And he was finally arrested 2 years after the crime, after a long, drawn-out investigation. And this was after a good friend of ours, who had been on the cell phone with my friend at the time of the murder, told the police exactly who did it. They had their prime suspect within an hour of the crime. And I was the guy that found him down in the basement of his house where he had been marched down and shot in the back of the head, execution style. And everybody else was afraid to go in the basement. It was 10 o'clock at night on a cold winter night, December 18th or 22nd of 2010, windy and snowing, and there I found him in the basement and knelt down and talked to him for a little while, and didn't really realize what had happened at the time because I didn't turn him over, I touched him and just talked to him, and finally came out of the basement and the police showed up and they just took over from there. Of course I was a suspect right off too, and had to spend half the night in the police station being questioned. But moving on from that, they finally arrested the guy. They put him on trial. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to 55 years. He's now appealing that sentence, saying he was a really good guy before he got addicted to drugs. And, you know, not always necessary to forgive. I'm still struggling with that one, to be honest with everybody here in the class, with this fellow. And let's move on here. We'll come back to him in a little bit. Okay, there are benefits of forgiveness. This was interesting, the text. It's better than other therapies. It does more good for you than trying to work through your pain and hurt in some other ways. Forgiveness, it increases your feelings of courage. It takes courage to forgive. It increases your feelings of competence and your own self-esteem. You do feel better after forgiving. And yeah, I've been hurt plenty of times, and I've forgiven without too much trouble. And yeah, it is freeing. I think we use the term liberating in the book here in a little bit. Not the same as reconciliation, though. And we'll cover reconciliation at the end of the chapter. You can forgive, but not be reconciled to that person. Even if I forgive the perpetrator of the murder against my friend, I'll not be reconciled to him. Actually, I never met him, and don't want to meet him, and have no interest in any kind of interdependence or relationship with him. Okay, is forgiveness a decision or a process? Well, it's both. I think it starts with a decision. It's an act of your will. And I agree with the book on this, and I'll just confirm that. You have to decide to forgive, and that just initiates a process of forgiveness, because it can be tough to do, but I think it starts with that decision that you're going to forgive. Now, I added this middle bullet point there. I believe that forgiveness must be spoken out loud, preferably to that person that has harmed you. And probably they need to be the one that asks for it first. And I think that's important for them to speak those words out loud. The book talks about implicit forgiveness later, which there's a time for that, I think. But in the case of egregious acts, it must be spoken out loud. And I have to say to somebody, I forgive you for stealing my coin collection when I was 10 years old. That just needs to be said out loud. And somehow if you say, well, in your head, yeah, I think I forgive somebody, but you never really let it out, get it out of you, get those words out into the air where they can't be pulled back, and actually speak that to the person that needs to hear it, that wants to hear it, I believe that's an important part of the process. And forgiveness, it's essential for moving on with your life in many ways. We'll get to that in just a second as well. But you can't get stuck. The process here is one, according to one researcher, if there's an injury that happens to you, my friend was murdered, I obsess over it, I'm angry about it at first, I grieve and then get very angry. Even thoughts of revenge cross through your mind and what you would do, and waiting on the police to make an arrest for 2 years and being tempted to take justice into my own hands. and that obsession part of it can be very dangerous. But then you reach this phase of transcendence. Transcendence means to take a step up and look at an issue or the problem or the crime or the hurt from a larger, a greater perspective. There's the key, a bigger perspective. You got out of your small-mindedness, you're looking at it with a larger view as to what's really important to you in your life. And in my case, I need to move on from that sad chapter, and that would be the transcendent perspective that I have to take. I've got to move on, I've got to let go of it, and in my belief system, I will see my friend again one day, and the perpetrator is being punished in this world and perhaps the next, but we'll see about that some other day. Okay, getting stuck in this process of forgiveness probably happens at obsession stage. And I like the metaphor the book uses of these eddies in the river, and you're in your kayak moving down the river and you get stuck behind a rock and the water's swirling, and maybe like this guy you've got a little problem there and you're in trouble and you just can't get out of that spot without a lot of effort or help. Some different eddies that are dangerous for people are just this long-term, low-grade simmering resentment. I've probably held that for a long time against this fellow. That resentment, it leads to revenge. You want to resent. You're holding on to the resentment. It feels good in a way. And plotting revenge one way or the other, or even imagining or fantasizing about revenge, somehow comforts you. And you're really stuck in an eddy if you're into the middle of that. It can be depression and withdrawal, especially when you've been seriously hurt, probably in a romantic relationship or by another family member who has dissed you in some pretty serious way. And the depression just drives us to withdraw from the relationship, to avoid even thinking about it or trying to deal with the issue. This eddy of victimization, obsessing about you being the victim and you being hurt, and why me? Why is it always me? And focusing on your own issues around it. And it's important to know that you may never receive an acknowledgement of the harm from the person who hurt you. In fact, I'll say here, a lot of times people are not aware that they hurt you, or they're not aware of how deeply it hurts you, even if they know, yeah, I did a little something, that they'll get over it, it wasn't a big deal. A lot of times the perpetrators say that to themselves about things, when really relationships can be seriously damaged over something that to one party seems very minor, and you may not get the acknowledgement you receive. Now this is where, again, communication is important, to let that person know how deeply you have been hurt, for you to understand yourself how deeply you've been hurt. And this is part of that process of getting unstuck. Starts with the communication with the other person, if you can have it, because it's not always possible. I've never talked to Mr. Thomas Holliday, who shot my friend. He's, and I probably never will. So that's a different side of it. It's all kind of within me, and I'm still probably, in that resentment phase someplace. I don't think about revenge anymore or anything like that. I might have if they had let him go or something. Okay, liberation from all those negative feelings that go with unforgiveness. Well, first of all, it takes some time to get there. It's not something that happens quickly or easily, and I think we know that when a couple of starts with children. One does something pretty bullying to another, and somebody forces them to say, "You're sorry." "I'm sorry," and it's not a real apology. There might be a little shame involved there, but doesn't necessarily mean it's real, and we know that it can take some time. And we cannot force another person to talk about it. We can go to somebody and say, "You really hurt me," and they could say, "I don't know what you're talking about," and really don't care to talk about it, and they could walk away from you. Probably not a family member. I would think that's a lower level of interdependence, or somebody may just avoid you. A family member may avoid you, and we've got a situation in our own family with an in-law married to one of my siblings who offended several members of the family one night after some drinking, but probably some truth came out of that heart in those harsh words. And I say truth from her perspective, not from the perspective of the people who were hurt. And the family has taken sides over this for the most part. And she's avoiding talking about it, the person who did a lot of the harming. She doesn't want to talk about it. That gets to this implicit communication. In one of the several incidents, she in fact chewed out my father over the phone and said some very mean things, forcing my father, who's a very nice guy, has a temperament a lot like mine, forcing him to hang up on her, which I don't suppose he's ever hung up on anybody on the phone in his lifetime. Well, some months later, he had to stop by to drop off a grandchild, and she invited him in, said she had just cooked some enchiladas and asked if he'd like a plate of enchiladas. Well, that was her implicit way of saying, I'm really sorry for what happened, I'd like our relationship to resume again. He wasn't ready to do that. He said, no, I think I'll leave. He didn't go in. He understood what she was trying to say implicitly, and wasn't ready to forgive yet, and still hasn't as far as I know. So this implicit communication, it happens a lot. People just kind of want to, they know they've wronged you and hurt you, and maybe they've even done something to try to make it right, and then they want the relationship to pick up where it left off without having to talk about it, to admit guilt, to say uncomfortable things, to ask for forgiveness. And sometimes we buy it, and sometimes we go for that and let the friendship resume. Brothers and sisters, perhaps this happens more often. With friends it can happen. Men do this a lot, especially men at work when they've offended one another. And one won't quite apologize, so what he does is admits the other guy's right in some other case, or somehow communicates that the other man is worthy and honorable and all of this, and it's understood as their way of saying I'm sorry. And there was an episode of Tool Time, where Tim Allen, I think, was the show, and he and his sidekick on the show had quite a falling out. And towards the end of the show, Tim, who was at fault, walks in and says to his sidekick, I can't remember his name, yeah, that's a nice shirt you're wearing there. And they put a subtitle in there, and that subtitle said, I was wrong, I'm sorry. And his buddy said, oh yeah, my wife got me this for my birthday. And the subtitle came up and said, it's okay, I forgive you. And I think that is too true, how men sometimes use this implicit form of communication to repair a relationship and then pick up as if nothing happened. But there's a subtext going on there. There's a lot of meta messages happening there that need to be read. So it's not so implicit as it seems, and people are pretty good at picking up on it. People making gestures, this is part of the implicit communication, a gesture of friendship, helping out solving a problem, or doing something, or good grief, I forget to take out the trash, and I have a little trouble with my wife over that. Well, I get the trash taken out, I clean up the trash in the whole house, I vacuum the floor, I make some gestures and do a whole bunch to try to show by my actions I am sorry, and I was wrong, and I repent, and I'm going to be better in the future. So we're making gestures as part of that implicit communication. Explicit communication, and I feel this is better, and there are many people who really only want explicit communication. I live with a couple, and it's very important for somebody who's wronged somebody else to come forward and say, I have hurt you, I'm sorry, I apologize, I feel regret and remorse, and I'm going to make it right. And then the other person's, it's on their shoulders to respond with, I forgive you, don't let it ever happen again, you're on a short lead, or whatever it may be, however the relationship unfolds going forward. But this would be an explicit communication about forgiveness. Okay, apologizing then. I just kind of went through the process there. But first of all, when I need to apologize for something I've done wrong, the two parties, you and I must agree that there was a violation and exactly what it was. So if I didn't come home till 2 a.m. one night, and my wife is very upset at me, this never happens, of course, and I can't just say, oh, I'm sorry I didn't call you. That wasn't the violation. That was probably one of them. The violation was I wanted to spend more time with my buddies or whatever I was doing than with my wife, who wanted me to be at home spending the evening with her. And I didn't plan it in advance or anything like that. We've got to agree on what the violation is. That's probably kind of a minor thing. But sometimes people that have done wrong want to ask forgiveness for something it's not really at the heart of what it is, or they want to ask forgiveness for the topical issue, the topical goal in the conflict we're having a conflict about, but the relational goal or the identity goal is still unsettled. And you got to forgive them for the topical thing because they asked forgiveness, they apologized, and they went through the whole rigmarole. But still, you were deeply hurt that they even did something like that in the first place. It strikes at your identity. The person needs to admit that that indeed is the violation, or one of them. There's often several. Acknowledging pain and wrongdoing, that I've done wrong, that I've really hurt you, and I recognize the pain I've caused you. Expressing remorse is another important part of this, and you've seen people that, yeah, I'm sorry, but no remorse is expressed. It's part of the equation, left out. It doesn't add up for us. If you want to use that mathematical metaphor, there has to be remorse for us to believe there's genuine forgiveness. Now, I added this next bulletin, I'm sorry. In our culture in the United States, and I think in many cultures, it's essential to say those two words, I'm sorry. I have deep regret at the consequences of my action. That's just not the same as, I'm sorry. I've hurt you deeply, I understand that now. I feel really badly about this, and I am sorry. And at that point, that's probably all that needs to be said. After that, you need to speak with your actions. You need to take action to make the relationship right, to repair anything you've done wrong if possible, or to compensate in some other way. Sometimes it's not possible if you left the gate unlocked and the dog got out and was ran over by a car, and you're responsible and you're expressing remorse, you acknowledge pain, you're sorry, you know exactly what the violation was, you were forgetful, and it's a string of forgetfulness and irresponsibility. We need to see some action. We need to see you locking the gate every day for one, and probably going down and bringing home or taking the person who owned the dog down to pick out a new puppy and covering all the expenses of that. So, but beyond that, I mean, you don't keep leaving the gate open. You change your lifestyle as well as you take action to show that you really are sorry, and it's not going to happen again. And that opens the door for trust to begin to be rebuilt. It can be difficult to receive forgiveness. I think you all know that here. It's hard to forgive yourself. Beware of self-loathing. You can start really getting down on yourself about something you've done. How could I be so stupid, such an idiot? How could I hurt somebody so deeply? And then you're left with trying to reconcile these two parts of yourself, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or something like that, or the two halves of Gollum and Smeagol. And there's part of you that did the evil thing, that did the offense, the crime, whatever it was. And is that part of you still in control? Can you reconcile these two selves? Can you own up to that part of you? Can you get it under control? And Plato has a wonderful metaphor in the Phaedrus. His book, it's actually about persuasion, but in this metaphor he talks about this human soul as a chariot with a white horse and a black horse. And you need both of them pulling together to get the chariot up into the heavens, these winged horses. But you've got to discipline that black one. That dark nature of yourself has to be brought under control. Are you able to do that, to get past the self-loathing and just discipline yourself to be the kind of person the goodness in you knows that you are and need to live out your life as? perhaps that's all part of forgiving yourself. And if you know you've got control and you can forgive yourself, if the other person has forgiven you, it's easier to forgive yourself. This can be difficult. Okay, finally, reconciliation here. Remember, forgiveness is not a reconciliation. I'm sorry, I forgive you, doesn't mean our relationship is restored to where it was before the incident happened. And in fact, it may never be quite fully restored. It takes some time, number one, to see by your actions that the other party really is doing their best to change and to be trustworthy again. I like this section of the textbook, and he talks about the metaphor of shooting an arrow with a fishing line across the chasm to start rebuilding a bridge that's been destroyed, a bridge between two people's their lives, a relationship. And then on that strand, pulling a heavier line across with the fishing line, and then pulling a good-sized rope across with that line, and then pulling the first cable across, just begin building the bridge. And so that first strand, that monofilament line, is just the truth, telling the truth about what happened, recognizing the truth, the depth to what degree you hurt that person, the truth about yourself that allowed you to offend them or harm them so deeply, perhaps truth on their part that they may have some culpability in the entire conflict in the incident. Maybe forgiveness needs to happen on both sides here, because you've hurt one another, and especially in an ongoing conflict that's been competitive and been toxic. That truth needs to be there about what really happened, and then begin to, the second part, the second strand is forbearance. That's giving up revenge or ideas of revenge. You're not going to get revenge. You're not going to try to get even in any way. You're putting a stop to that toxic circle, that spiral of violence and retribution, all these things. You give up the right to that, even if you had the right in the first place. That's forbearance. And then empathy for that other person is the third strand. That's the nice heavy rope you pull across. And now we're getting somewhere when you actually begin to feel the pain of the other person and feel the hurt that you've caused them, and them for you if they've been also part of the conflict that's really damaged the relationship, and they recognize they've hurt you as well. And you reacted out of hurt, and then they react out of hurt, and back and forth it goes until you realize you don't want a marriage to dissolve, and you try to get back on this road to reconciliation. The empathy has to be there. And then finally, that fourth line, the big cable that you pull across, it really gets the bridge started, is that a commitment to the relationship out of your awareness that you're interdependent. Either with a marriage, you want the interdependence to continue. With a brother and a sister, perhaps, there may be interdependence that you can never cut. With two best friends, you want the interdependence to continue. You're aware that you need it, and so you commit to the relationship, even though you may have your eyes open. It's the old, burn me once, shame on you. Burn me twice, shame on me. And sometimes, let's say with an alcoholic relative, they've gone through the whole thing and asked forgiveness and said they're sorry, and they've gone to rehab and they're changing their life. And I've got two relatives. One did the whole rehab thing twice, in fact, and then went back into alcoholism again. Just had a friend who died and wanted to have one last drink for his old friend. Well, that started it, and 3 bottles of liquor later, another relative was giving him a bath to wash off all the vomit and saying, "You're checking into rehab again tomorrow." He shot himself that morning. Very difficult situation, and just could not commit to making that relationship work. Another relative went through rehab and didn't hurt anybody nearly as deeply as far as I know, other than not being there, and has stayed on the wagon ever since, and is a much nicer person to be around these days and makes family holidays much more pleasant. And so we're committed to that relationship, We're interdependent there, and we're going to make sure that that relationship continues to improve. The prior relative never even gave us that chance to do it, but we were suspicious. And if the other relative starts having some wine again in the evenings, we'll probably have a pretty serious talk about that as well at some point. Okay, again, this chapter is essential, and there are any number of religious perspectives you can come at this with about forgiveness and reconciliation, but the chapter does a nice job at blending that with just some very pragmatic perspectives on why it's best to forgive and try to reconcile, and even leaving room for that idea that, you know, there's some people that you probably don't need to forgive. I'm still struggling with that one, and I guess since I brought up Mr. Holliday in this lecture, I guess I've still got an open wound there that I need to work through myself, and that's part of it. Sometimes it just takes a lot of time, and I've got to reconcile myself to some of these ideas, as well as that practical thing going on in my life, so that if I ever go back to that town and visit people that I know, I'll see reminders of them, and I may have to deal with some emotion again that I just ought to get past. All right, thanks a lot for listening, and we'll talk to you later.